Good morning, all, and welcome to the lecture Techniques of Policy Implementation. Implementation means to carry out or to fulfill or produce and complete an objective or decision. This is different from public policy making. So, a policy is often a broad statement of goals without specific objectives. A policy is very often more a hypothesis. So, the implementation, what's the job of implementation? Implementation converts a policy into action program. Policies grow out of ideas, often with multiple and possibly conflicting vague goals. Policies point to a desired causal chain of events between initial conditions and desired future consequences. Implementation is the action plan to bridge the gap between the two. The choice and adoption of implementation techniques have a definite bearing on a policy performance. An implementation schedule is of critical importance. It is generally recognized that the policy and programs do not implement themselves and that specific techniques into realities. An implementation strategy needs therefore to provide for necessary controls on staffing, cost and timing. The role the implementation agencies play during the course of implementation needs to be clearly understood by all, particularly where it involves the monitoring and evaluation of progress. So it's very clear that uh, this, the main things, that means staffing, timing, and control, uh, are the various strategies uh, which is necessary for the uh, success of implementation. Okay. An effective implementation strategy must provide for implementation techniques. Albert Waterston offers a number of broad-based approaches here. So, what are the effective strategy? So, take the case of uh, a project or a decision taken by the government to make the general education into a high tech. So, government to accomplish the objectives, government must have some strategies. So, here their first concern itself with creating necessary conditions for the implementation. So we need necessary conditions for the uh, implementation of that particular uh, policy. So maybe infrastructure or the spatial uh, facilities of that particular uh, government schools, etc., etc. So then, secondly, attention needs to be paid to bridging the gaps which frustrate implementation. So, in the process of implementation, the officers, the executives, or the stakeholders who are participating in the implementation process may have frustration on sometimes with the uh, issue of their dissatisfaction over the uh, working conditions of that particular project. Uh, so there must be an attention to uh, solve the issues by making bridging or bridging the gap which frustrate the implementation. The programming structure should be established in executive organization with the capable and trained staff. So they must use the capable and trained staff. Thirdly, policy program progress must be continuously evaluated because changing conditions result in deviation from the intended policy designs. And fourthly, prior analysis of policy is another approach to improving the implementation process. It facilitates time schedules and cost estimates to be set up as a criteria against which to measure the progress of the policy or program. The time schedules and cost estimates also help to determine objectively the progress of the uh, policy designs. Uh, Prior analysis is very important one. So it also helps to uh, uh, measure the time and cost estimates to uh, set up as a criteria against which to measure the progress of the policy or program. Similarly, Williams suggests several techniques of demonstration and monitoring for improving implementation process. A small-scale demonstration exercise can generate useful information and work out operational units. Monitoring involves periodic site visits by program personnel to examine management practices and ensure staff capacity. For example, take the case of a building of a big project like metro or a big flyover. So in the uh, implementation time, the executives uh, must uh, visit the site and make sure that the management practices and staff capacity are going well. So they must have the planning in how many within how many time how many um, time within how many years or how many months the program or the project will be completed. So their planning is very important, and timing. They can also use they must ensure that the a particular part of work should be completed within a particular time frame that is already they fixed. So they can also use deploy the staffs into another area of work, so so as to prevent the wastage of time. At the same time, they can complete the um, work within the time frame. So timing and scheduling is very equally important. So the planning, timing, and scheduling are important techniques in the implementation process. Correct timing and effective scheduling of work constitute a necessary condition for successful performance. Among the techniques for timing and scheduling set of network techniques, which include critical path method and the program evaluation and review techniques, and chart also are also used to plan the implementation of the policy project in schedule, calendar time, and to show the progress achieved in relation to such a schedule. Conditions for successful implementation. Implementation is seen varying along a continuum ranging from successful to aborted. Successful implementation involves many operations and procedures as well as time and resources. However, successful implementation should not be equated with impact measures, as implementation is not the same thing as impact. W. Williams makes an attempt to identify ways in which policy failure can be prevented. He exhorts policymakers to pay more attention to implementation capacity and sets out a checklist of questions. So we cannot say that impact is same as uh, the implementation. So impact may be negative or positive. So it cannot say that every project will be success. So there will be a chance of failure that may be an impact. So to prevent the failures, he also suggests a set of checklists. Ask some questions. How well articulated is the policy to implementers? And secondly, how capable are the policymakers of developing meaningful guidelines for and assistance to implementers? And thirdly, how capable are the implementers to develop and carry out new policy? And fourthly, how much ability or power do either have to change the policymakers and implementers, their capacity to change the situation that is adaptable to the smooth functioning of that particular implementation. Sabatier and Masmanian take an even bolder approach in an article published and identify 5 conditions for the effective policy implementation. First one, program is based on a sound theory relating to changes in target groups, group behavior to the achievements of the desired end and state objectives. And the statute or the law which is passed by the legislature contains unambiguous policy directives and structures of the implementation process so as to maximize the likelihood that target groups will perform as desired. So every time the target groups, the working group should expand the scope of their implementation uh, style. The leaders of the implementation agencies possess substantial managerial and political skill and are committed to statutory goals. The program is actively supported by organized constituency groups and by few key legislators throughout the implementation process, with the courts being neutral or supportive. Uh, that that means when the project is on, there may be support. The support will be always there from the part of the organized groups in the constituency and the uh, legislators in that particular region. So their support is always there, and throughout the implementation process with, and also the courts sometimes may be neutral or supportive. So the project can move forward. And relative priority of statutory objective is not significantly undermined over time by the emergencies of conflicting public policies or by change in relevant socio-economic conditions that undermine the statute's technical theory or political support. The argument put forward by these authors is that problem can be avoided by anticipating complications and difficulties in advance, but this assumes that the implementation takes place in static environment and in a politics-free world. But a policy to be implemented must be given concrete shape. In particular, the presumptions take over the whole issue of consensus, either in a party political or ideological sense, or in terms of organizational interest affected by the policy. Chase says in an article that it's difficult to obtain complaints where policy or a program is to be implemented by agencies whose intentions do not necessarily coincide with those of the policy formulators. Solution to these difficulties are therefore seen in terms of first one, gaining credibility, secondly, reference to higher authority, and thirdly, financial incentives. Chase seems to ignore the relationship between interest, politics, and the balance of power among those making, implementing, and affected by the policy. The study of evaluation of the national health policy in India illustrates the importance of setting guidelines and of administrative discretion in implementing policy. Any policy must be given clarity and concreteness. As a matter of fact, the further down the bureaucracy as a policy goes, the more clarity is attached to details, requirements, and guidelines. Any policy, in order to be administered, needs translation into procedures for compliance. Pressman and Widowski, the authors of leading study of implementation, observes that the cards in this world are stacked against these things happening. As much efforts is required to make them move. Walter Williams also observes the lack of concern for implementation is currently the crucial impediment to improving programs, operations, policy analysis, and experimentation in social policy areas. Nothing comes across more strongly than the great naive about implementation. No policy formulator can assume that the decision will automatically be implemented as envisioned. Policy implementation requires a wide variety of actions, including issuing policy directives that are clear and consistent, creating organizational units and assigning personnel with the information and authority necessary to administer the policies, coordinating personal resources and expenditure to ensure benefits to target groups, and evaluating implemental actions of the personnel. None of these steps is easy. The implementation of policy thus involves not the end of policy making, but a continuation of policy making by other means. It must be realized that a good policy, if it is to be implemented, must have effective means of enforcement. Bureaucracy, community, market, voluntary sector may be viewed in terms of different ways of enforcing policy decisions. Each implementer has its own role. In short, while the bureaucracy, executive staff agencies, commission are the primary implementers of public policies, may other actors are involved and they should not be neglected in our study of the policy implementation process. Okay, thank you. These are the references.